What's the dumbest rule your school ever enforced? Not being allowed to wear hoodies, jackets or sweaters that lack the official school logo. I was a high school teacher for several years. Both buildings I worked in were freezing. And having admin pull students out of my classroom during a 50-minute period giving them detention instead of letting them learn is cruel and completely unnecessary, in my opinion. My school had 3 staircases along a very long corridor. We were banned from using the middle staircase because it got overcrowded. The ban was lifted once they realized it only made the other 2 staircases just as crowded. At my kids' elementary school, students had to smile while walking in the hall. If you throw snowballs, you get a 1-day suspension. The first long weekend after a snowfall, everyone would throw snowballs to get an additional day added to the long weekend. You can only use 3 squares of TP. You had to wear your ID around your neck on a rope thing. Then the choking started. Candy canes were outlawed because you could sharpen them to a point and use them as a shiv. I went to school in rural Washington. We were definitely weren't somewhere that shankings were to be expected. I got Saturday school for missing a day of classes when I was 16. Seems reasonable. Except I missed to go complete my US citizenship and officially become a citizen alongside my mom. It took us 12 years to go through the legal process. BTW. Whole other issue. I had a note from my mother as well as a signed official federal form they give you to explain to school employers why you were absent. Apparently the only acceptable absence excuse was illness. I got punished for becoming a citizen. Elementary school principal banned talking at lunch. If you were caught talking or even signing to someone, you had to go sit by yourself on a folding chair with no table. There was once my mom came to eat lunch with my older sister and I. The principal was like, oh, you should go eat out in the hallway with your daughters. And she was like, nah, I'm gonna sit here with my daughter and her friends and talk to them and enjoy their presence. Usually if a parent came for lunch, the student could invite one friend to join. Unless you had siblings. Then it was too many people, so you couldn't invite a friend. Anyway, one of my older sister's friends whispered to my mom that she was going to move, so she wouldn't get in trouble for talking. This was a 9-year-old. That if you say, do anything back to your bully, it becomes a mutual conflict and isn't bullying. So if they start calling you slurs and making you feel bad every day and you call them stupid once or twice, the school probably won't help. Also, dress code required school branded hoodies. They were $50. If you wore an on-school hoodie, you got in-school suspension. After 9/11, my school instituted a zero-tolerance policy on bullying and violence. What 9/11 had to do with bullying? I don't know. Anyways, Halloween 2001, I dressed up as the guy from Clockwork Orange. He carries a cane around. The principal pulled me aside, told me walking around with a cane could be a weapon. Therefore just walking with it is an act of violence, and suspended me for a couple of days, telling me that after 9/11, we don't mess around with that kind of stuff. X200B edit. This happened in Quebec, in a small town. If we didn't see it happen, it didn't happen. All it did was train bullies to be really good at keeping their voices down and being aware of their surroundings so they could avoid doing it within a teacher's line of sight. It meant if you were ever outside of a teacher's vision range, you were still fair game for heaps of abuse. And if you tried to report things that teachers didn't see, then the teachers treated you like you were making up BLLS. It also didn't stop teachers from enforcing double standards, like believing reports from their personal favorites, even when they didn't see it happen, since they could just claim they saw it happen if it was contested. That school was basically a training facility to turn bullies into stealth experts. The new principal made a morning roundup rule where anyone arriving to class after the last bell had to go to the cafeteria and listen to a lecture about not being late for class. This took about an extra 15 minutes, making the students even more late to class than they would have otherwise been. Needless to say, everyone hated it, even the teachers. That principal didn't last long. Closing boys' toilets because some cunt was stealing toilet paper. When school staff announced this stupid rule, some students actually threatened to sit on the tables then. Toilet paper rationing. This was in 1997, 98 BTW. Apparently the high school girls' room was going through too much toilet paper, so the dean, a woman, stood outside the door and distributed a few squares of one-ply institutional toilet paper to us as we went in. If she noticed toilet paper on the floor, our ration got cut down. If we asked for more for bigger jobs, we were told to save it for home. There were several episodes of girls stuck in stalls until friends could beg for more TP because of period messes or unexpected bowel incidents. The dean wouldn't even hand it over, she would go in the bathroom and pass it a few squares at a time over the door. If you didn't catch it as it fell and it landed on the floor, well, that's your fault and you're not getting more. If you used more than she thought necessary, tough luck. Go to class with blood, shit on your body. It took about a week of extremely angry parents coming to the school and calling both the school and the school board. But we finally got our toilet paper back. Unlimited. How did we celebrate? By ping her car, of course. I was sent to the principal in elementary school for getting a drink of water out of line, as in we walked down the hall in a formation and we had designated water drinking stops. To this day I still remember the principal asking angrily, well, what if everyone started getting water without permission? And I still don't have an answer. We had to sign a waiver before prom stating we won't dance dirty. No one went to prom. We were not allowed to have facial hair at all, like to the point where the principal would walk around during lunch with razors and shaving cream and do stubble checks. Absolutely ridiculous, and he would send tons of us to the bathrooms to shave during lunch, no matter how small the stubble was. No beads. Apparently they thought beaded jewelry was gang related. It wasn't really the rule, that was dumb, but the reason for it. In my last year of high school, the school issued a rule that all students had to wear student IDs. If you didn't, you had to immediately go and pay for another ID. While you can see how many students may have saw this a way to skip class, the reason for this was the school shootings that happened the previous year. The reasoning was that it would be easier to spot who is a student and who is not a student, to then see who has malicious intent. Except that most shooters were students, so textbook checkouts were an absolute shit show. They were assigned entirely by number and condition. They were not assigned to a specific student. As long as you turned in a textbook at the end of the year and the textbook number was on the list, that was the first step to being okay. The second step was condition. The textbooks were graded as new, good, fair, and poor. If the book was returned in a lesser condition than when it was checked out, you had to pay for a new textbook. This included condition changes from new to good. Yet we almost never got new textbooks. The ones we had were usually around 10 years old. So they went through at least 3 condition changes over their lifespan. It was pure extortion. You had to pay for the textbook at the end of the year, and if you didn't, they'd keep you from advancing. So that sucks. Right. That compounded with another stupid rule we had. Lockers were not allowed to be locked. In fact, our lockers didn't even have a latch, they were just painted wood doors that were really just poorly installed flaps that would hang open. This was ultimately so the cops could check everyone's lockers for drugs. But it led to another issue. Stolen textbooks. So the textbooks were generally falling apart, and we were expected to both keep them with us for class and also bring them home with us for homework. We also didn't want them stolen, so most students kept them in their backpacks constantly. For every class. This was a rural school too, so most students had a decent walk home even from bus stops. Mine was about a mile. Point being, the textbooks were abused, as were our bags and backpacks. So you start with a poor condition textbook and add the extra wear and tear, and it's just a matter of time before the cover rips off. So those with acid textbooks would just grab one from whatever exposed locker had one. As long as the student was in the same class as you, it's fair game. In case you were wondering where the money went, it went into new awnings every year for the exterior doorways and into our famously bad football team. Our girls' teams were a bunch of champions and never got and respect for it. The school only cared about our city football team. They would go entire seasons without a single win. I got a suspension for holding a stick. The phone call with my mom went something like this, only slightly dramatized. School misses. The quack. Your son has been suspended, mom. Oh my goodness. What did he do? S. He was holding a stick. M. Did he hit someone with it? S. No. He was just holding it. M. Did he threaten to hit someone with it? S. No. Just held it. M. Did he refuse to put it down when you asked? S. No. He was very cooperative. M. So, what did he do wrong? S. He held a stick. M. And I should be upset about that? S. Absolutely. You know we have a zero tolerance policy. M. Right, well, I'll talk with him. As you might guess, I did not get in trouble at home. My school was in a poor area of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Not a lot of schools here have money for anything. Because of a huge donation of books at the time I was in school, my school got an absurd number of books, including expensive ones. There were a few dumb rules, but the dumbest of them all, we basically couldn't touch the books in the library without permission. It might sound reasonable at first, but check this out. The library was huge, and there were lots of books, including contemporary classics, non-fiction like The Last Problem, English literature like Infinite Jest, How to Kill a Mockingbird and Whatnot. Dude, there was so much there. That place was probably the most valuable place in the entire school. I mean, it was awesome. There were enough books there for each student to lend about 100 every day. Here's the problem. The library went all but into shade for the entirety of my time there. Why? The amount of work it took to read one of those books was ridiculous and pretty much made sure not a single student bothered to try. First, you couldn't take any of the books home. Period. Forget the fact that they had your address and all your parents' info. So in the case that someone took it and didn't return it, they could just get it back. It had happened before, at least once before the rule was made. Second, you couldn't leave the library with them, no matter what. Third, if you wanted to read the book, you'd have to do it in the library at the lunch break, which was about 45 minutes. So unless you weren't hungry ever, you had only a few minutes to go to the library. It was only open for a few hours around the break, and not at all at any other time. So unless you stayed there for hours until the break for the afternoon classes, you just wouldn't have another chance. Those hours around the break could be used for you to be tutored by a teacher, which almost never happened. Fourth, once you went through all of that, you could only read the book under the observation of the people that volunteered to work in the library for credit, which was never more than 2 or 3 people. Sometimes no one. Which means that if you got there and there were already 3 people there, forget it. Unless you were willing to read it standing up close to where the book was kept, and even then they'd check on you every minute or so. Fifth, you couldn't get inside the library with a backpack, with food, in groups, speaking, without the appropriate uniform. You couldn't get in with the gym one, for instance, with other books, earrings, necklaces or anything that could make noise while you were walking. Some were reasonable, but the issue was that one simple mistake and you would get banned. Sixth, any banishment from it was permanent. I complained about it once in the 2nd year and was never allowed inside ever again. I even tried to get some teachers to help me, but it didn't work. 7th, and probably the dumbest, only the students that had a certain amount of high grades could get any book at all. If you got something like 4.10 on your last biology exam, you couldn't even get inside the library. The standard was so insane. Only 6 other students and I in my classroom had enough good grades to get books. In all my time there, the library was basically deserted for the majority of it. I tried to go there many times, but it was too much work. Out of all the books I only managed to read 2 Brazilian ones, A Cura do Lanche, The Lunch War and Blackout, which I remembered to this day in details. There were times where I legit thought about straight up ditching class to read some of them. I tried to get more, like The Last Problem, Kafka's Metamorphosis, Ulysses, which I know I wouldn't have been able to do it, but I was just curious. A Brief Story of Time, Wuthering Heights etc. But the amount of work it took was so much that it was just almost impossible to be able to read more than 1 or 2 books a year, and even that took dedication, because I basically had to sacrifice part of my lunch time. The rumor was that the principals we had more than one basically saw us as savages who would destroy the books if we were allowed to touch them, and even though they had no reason to believe, so the library worked well without those restrictions a year before I had gotten there, with only minimal incidents, and even those didn't result in the books getting destroyed. TL. My school made it very hard to read the huge amount of books they had.